Silvy Khoucasian, welcome to Men This Way.
I'm so honored to be the first lady on your wonderful podcast. I'm very excited.
You very much are the very first woman on this podcast,
I better be.
as it should be. And I am certain that our listeners, whether man or woman or otherwise, are going to just enjoy hearing your voice because you are brilliant and your voice is just so delicious. So you are welcome in this Men This Way space and embraced. Thanks for being here, babe.
Thank you for having me.
So today we're talking about intimacy, right? I'm starting to talk more about the five pillars of a thriving man. And when I talk about intimacy, one of the things that I think people immediately think of or default to is intimacy with another person, which is why you are perfect to have this conversation with me for so many reasons. But the reality is, I don't necessarily mean intimacy with another person. That's certainly part of it, but a big part of it is intimacy with self. And as you and I were talking about this episode, about doing this, just by the way, 10 minutes ago, this is Sylvie's. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, but babe, I just want to acknowledge you. You live dangerously.
It only took 5 years. I'll take the credit.
Well, actually, that's a good point. It did take 5 years. I would have done this 5 years ago with you. That's a really good point. Thank you for your honesty. But when it came down to it, you were like, let's do it right now. And I was like, oh, really? You're like, yep. So I acknowledge you, applaud you, and thank you. But when we're talking about doing this, having this conversation around intimacy, what is intimacy? You particularly, you like to talk about a particular distinction, which is definitely important, and that is the difference between relational intimacy and intimacy with self. Tell us more about that from your experience, perspective, expertise, brilliance, wonder.
No pressure. Well, as we were exploring themes to talk about today, I'm always so fascinated by the different ways different cultural narratives, different systems really approach intimacy and so many other realms and themes and things that come up in our world. And I think for me, growing up in a very communal, family-oriented culture, for me, I don't think of intimacy with self first. I'm Armenian, ethnically born in Saudi Arabia, lived in Syria for a couple of years, and our family is so close in our day-to-day relational experiences, and we just experience intimacy from a much more relational lens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that here in the West, here in America, there is so much of that focus on self and self-development, personal development,
Yeah.
transformation, setting those firm boundaries. All those things are beautiful and necessary and needed. But I do think a lot of times it robs us of that more communal, relational dynamic, which is absolutely just as important. If not,
Yeah.
I would even lean maybe more important.
Well,
I won't go that far.
well, this has showed up in our relationship a lot, I think, to both our surprise in many ways. And I mean, look, you make a great point because here in the West, what is our, especially the United States of America, our core value is freedom, independence, which means separate essentially from it means not being relational. Independence is all about separation of relating into individuals. So, and I, growing up in my family system, feeling, in retrospect, understanding that what I experienced, despite having many wonderful people around me, four wonderful parents who, were all going through their stuff, and um, but realizing that from a young age, I was by default really being conditioned to be extremely independent from a very young age, such that that was my highest value, was taking care of myself, learning to know myself. So much of the personal development work that I did after the military, I mean, the military was incredibly disconnecting from myself, such that I was just, useless to the world, and afterwards had to wander aimlessly about to find myself. But the work that I did, so-called finding myself after, was very about becoming intimate with me again. Who is Bryan? What does Bryan feel, think, want? I mean, my book, Tell the Truth, Let the Peace Fall Where It May, was very much an exploration of my own intimacy with who is this being called Bryan Reeves, and what does he care about, all of that. And then I met you. Yeah. Sly little smile on your face, for those who can't see it, because she knows.
Ta-da!
Ta-da. And, even when we were first together, I had so much momentum, 6 years of singledom, singlehood, not to mention, again, 25, 30 years of just life training, probably more than that, of independence. And so that's where this thing about intimacy with another, intimacy with other, intimacy with you, I was so, despite all that I had been learning, in so many ways, I was so novice and unprepared for intimacy, true intimacy with you. And again, we'll dive more into what this means, but I'm curious, I mean, your experience at the beginning, what was it like for you meeting this man who was fiercely independent?
Well, I think, this is where the whole thing of where we can be drawn to people who have claimed certain aspects of themselves that are very different than what we've claimed. So for me, I felt very confident about being connected with my family. I felt like my relationship skills, I just felt like I knew how to take care of people. Like I felt like that was something that I grew up with. It was very comfortable for me. And I think part of the reason I was drawn to you was because you had this beautiful ability to be so self-expressed. And you had this way of, you had this adventurous spirit and this exploratory way of being, and very curious about the world. And I think, with both individualistic ways of being and communal ways of being, I think there's benefits and I think there can be costs. And I think for me, one of the costs was, and this even happened, when we were dating in the beginning, I went into that role of being very supportive and being very, coming with you to all your events and being really wanting to be present and wanting to be a really good partner. And I started to slowly feel really disconnected from myself.
And me lapping it up. Like, I would loved having you at my events because I had been so independent, so more focused on intimacy with me, which was pretty lonely in a sense. There was a lot of loneliness that I was also avoiding. And here you are, and I'm wanting you around constantly so I can feel relational intimacy, but also not really knowing how to attune to you, how to feel you, how to feel what's happening for you, how to see what's really going on for you. And so it was like a perfect little storm.
It really was.
For us at the beginning.
And I think, which is where, when it really did bubble up for us, where I started to feel resentful, angry within myself, because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know how to express the boundaries. I didn't know how to express my needs. And I want to talk about, I share a lot about systems in my work. The system of patriarchy, women have very rigid roles, and they're very often put in the more supportive dynamic. They're not as encouraged to really, pursue their careers full on and really get to, really own those parts of themselves. We've come a long way, but those narratives and that messaging runs really, really deep. And so I had no idea that those things were playing out, I'm like, no, I've been doing this work for all this time. I could, I could be able to see through those things, but I was really able to empathize, I think for the first time in my life, how deeply rooted those messages were. And it was absolutely excruciating to start unpacking that.
Mhm.
And I think that was one of when we broke up really soon after that
Yeah.
experience.
Well, because I had no idea what was going on. That for me, this was the greatest thing ever. I was full on doing me because I'd spent the last 15 years learning intimacy with me. Who am I? What do I care about? What do I want? What am I feel? All of that. Again, there was massive blind spots that only relational intimacy with you could reveal, right? It's so easy to not see what I don't want to see or have never seen when I don't have another human being in my space pointing them out in all kinds of ways. Not consciously, but just, just by the mirror effect, we could say. But I was so confused. What is happening? Why isn't she as thrilled as I am?
Mm.
And when we broke up, what really came clear to me we broke up around 6 months in. And what really came clear to me during that time is just how do I say it? Just how, well, let's just say unattuned
Mm.
I was to what was happening for you. Like just so unattuned. It's not that I didn't care. Of course I cared,
Yeah.
but I put it in the box of, well, that's your stuff.
Mm.
And I don't know what it is, and I don't need to figure it out, and I don't need to worry about it because that's your stuff. It's not my responsibility. That's your stuff. Like I'm taking care of me, I'm doing me, I'm figuring me out, I'm still all of that. You
Yeah.
you know, you got you, I got me. And when we broke up, it was such a shock to my system. It was such a
And I think it's so interesting that in many ways, like we kind of swapped, we started to really take on and integrate the ways of being that the other one was a little bit more practiced in. Like for me, to end our relationship was a huge, confusing, disoriented experience where I shouldn't be taking care of you. I shouldn't be doing this. This is selfish. This is like, how can I make this choice? And for you, coming in touch with all these more relational aspects, I think is what
yeah,
allowed us to come back together. And I think a lot of people
yeah.
always wonder, well, how do you know, when it's right to get back together?
Mm.
What's different? Have there been any really huge realizations that have taken place for that relationship to start to have a chance to play out differently? Or is it just going to repeat itself and just get right back on the same carousel all over again?
Yeah. And I think there was a massive seismic shift in my awareness, what I was paying attention to, what I knew I needed to pay attention to. It doesn't mean it was easy after that, far from it. But it was really the beginning of an entirely new um, adventure. I love adventure, so I use it. It really was an adventure, but new path of understanding. What does it mean to be intimate with someone? My a man that I worked with, Steve James, one of my earlier guests on this podcast, he defined intimacy in a way that was really profound for me and simple. He said, intimacy is simply seeing what is there to be seen and feeling what is there to be felt. Seeing what is there to be seen and feeling what is there to be felt. And again, I'd been doing a lot of things to learn about, before meeting you and even since, a lot of practices around feeling my body, feeling myself, seeing into my thoughts, all of that. And our breakup, when we came back, like in that time, I realized, wow, I am so not seeing what is there to be seen with Silvy and feeling what is there to be felt
Mm.
with her, because you had been giving me so many signals that all was not well and that you were struggling. And I think for me, and what I'm hearing you saying too, is you were attracted to the part of me that was fiercely independent because you were so enmeshed in your family system as well.
Well, I definitely identify very much with caretaker role and being really taking on a lot of the emotional experiences in my family system. And it was really hard for me to have boundaries around what's not mine, what is mine, figuring out. There's a process in therapy called individuation, and I think I was
Mm,
really being called into that space more and more as the beginning of our relationship has started to evolve. But I would say, when you describe intimacy in what you just shared,
mm,
for me, intimacy was claiming that those feelings that I had that I oftentimes would project on you in the beginning. I
mm-hmm.
wanted to blame you. I wanted it to be your fault. I would get angry.
I remember.
and and that's one of the confusing and disorienting and beautiful gifts, I think, of projection, is that it can allow us to see things. Unfortunately, we blame it on someone else, but if we can use that information as a tool to really understand, wow, that's really something that's going on with me, and there was so much grief and so much anger, to kind of wake up to this again, those narratives that I have felt oppressed, and I have felt like I didn't know how to step into my power. I didn't know how to really take on the things that I wanted to take on next to you without kind of fitting myself in the role that I thought I had to fit in.
Yeah.
Like finding my own way and carving my own way while being in relationship to you was completely foreign territory for me.
Yeah. And I know, I can look back and see what I often tried to do, and not in a very skilled way. And at times I was very harsh, I think. Um, Especially when I was triggered and angry, because I was just then projecting my own stuff back onto you. I'm angry and it's your fault. You did this to me.
Mm.
You need to change. You need to be different so that I can get back to myself, and living in that myth. And it was just so cloudy between us in those early days, and that, I
We
think
were
that,
so focused on ourselves. Like, I think
yeah,
we got to a point where
yeah,
I'm trying to feel safe, you're trying to feel free, and we
yeah,
completely didn't have the tools or the ability to know how to really comfort and soothe one another. And also that how that would oftentimes be a path to then resolving our own experiences and feelings, right?
yeah, of course, yeah, yeah. When we met, I had so much intellectual knowledge, but I had very little embodied application of what I believed in my thoughts, in my belief systems, and all the things that I had learned about relationship and intimacy, and and you said something interesting about grieving. There was a lot of grieving that you were going through, and I didn't realize that I had so much grieving coming for me
Mm.
that I had been avoiding for so long. Just the act of choosing a partner and staying with her. And I'd never really done that before.
Mm.
I had attempted it, but that's not something you really attempt. You either do it or you don't. So I'd been really half in and half out before in previous relationships. Even if I said I was all in, I was half in. And naturally those relationships they never really worked well. And with you, I knew in my depths I was all in, but I think it took me a while, like on the surface, all my old patterns, all my old fears, my just sort of just, the way I'd been showing up for so long, and was terrified. And I couldn't see that. I couldn't see that. I couldn't speak to that. I couldn't, that was a huge blind spot of mine. You could say, in a way, that was where I lacked intimacy with myself.
Mm.
And sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I also think, there's something you and I often talk about is that these markers, these milestones of transition, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're going from, both you and I have been single for 6 years,
Yeah,
and that's a long time
it is.
to be not committed in partnership.
Yeah.
And to then come together and to know that, okay, this is going to be the relationship that's going to go towards marriage, and this is the person that we want to spend our life with. And how we often talk about these lacks, this lack of rituals, this lack of communal grievings and celebrations. All we see when people get married, or when they get engaged on TV and in fairy tales, is ecstasy. They don't show the grief that so many people are going through, especially as we partnered up and we're being mirrored all of these parts of ourselves that we probably thought we had already worked on. Both of us had been doing so much personal development work. It was shocking that so much was coming up for both of us.
Oh, I thought I had relationship all figured out. I thought I had it licked, so to speak. I thought like we were just gonna, I mean, you were amazing. I knew I was amazing. You were there. You were an associate therapist at that time. I was a renowned relationship coach. I was like, we got this.
Yeah.
I was flying high. I mean, everything was just on point for me. And wow, it just was a matter of a couple months before I started to hit those walls of my own, the shadow sides of me that I was not intimate with, that I hadn't seen. And I think, in the years, so let's see, we've been together over 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we're still on this journey of intimacy with self, intimacy with other. We're still teaching each other how to be with us, right? I mean,
and I think, and for each person that's in a relationship, that work is going to look so different. Like for me, it's easy for me to know what's happening for you. I usually can feel what's going on for you before you can feel it in you. But that's not always helpful, right? It's like, for me, what's been my journey is, it's okay. Bryan, others they can take care of themselves. If they need me, they'll come ask for support. What's going on for me? What am I feeling? What's coming up for me? And to really start bringing that compass and point it back towards myself, so that I can actually start to be more intimate with myself, because I think I was really struggling with that. And of course, that's the vulnerability piece, getting in touch with that and then sharing that's so hard to do.
Well, I think that's really key, because what you're saying right there, Sylvia, I think is really key, because I'm also aware that we often are wrong about what we think is happening for the other. And there is a projection, or we're just guessing wrong. We're just misreading a cue, a sign, a facial expression, a tone of voice, or misreading. And I think what you just said about coming back to, what am I feeling? What's happening for me? I know in our relationship, these moments when we've been able to stop focusing on what we think is going on for the other person and come back and acknowledge. I mean, we've had to both at times kind of hold each other and say, okay, wait a second. What are you feeling? What's happening for you right now?
Well, when you have two relationship coaches in a relationship, it's hard to turn that off sometimes.
It is.
But it's so vital.
But it's so important, because when I'm in my, whatever anxiety has a grip on me, whatever story I'm caught up around, and for me, it's usually some, story of the future or the past, or usually the future, really, that I'm afraid is going to happen, or I don't want to happen, or just, I don't know, things are out of order and I wish they were in order, and I'm talking about it. And that never helps us. That rarely helps us. That usually creates a disconnect between us. And when either I'm able to arrest it, but usually more often it's you still be saying, Bryan, what's happening for you right now? Like, shut up. You never say shut up, but basically you say shut up about whatever. Your facial expression might say shut up about whatever's you think is going on right now. What's happening for you? What's going on right now? What are you feeling? What's going on? And when I'm able to then check in with myself and go, oh, okay, Yeah, you know what? I'm feeling really frazzled or really just, I don't know, I'm feeling all over the place. I'm feeling split. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling behind. I'm feeling, okay, well, now we're able to have, I feel like that, Sylvia, that is our saving grace at times.
Well, we both have a lot of relationship jargon up our tool belt, right? And it feels like it can sometimes become like this intellectual pseudo vulnerability.
Right.
And we know when we're being vulnerable, and we know when we're maneuvering around it, trying to weasel our way out.
Yeah.
And connection doesn't happen in those
No.
places. It doesn't. So at some point, when you start to feel really disconnected, when we have felt, all right, like where's the piece of vulnerability here? What's important for me to share? And sometimes I have to go away from you and journal, or meet with my therapist to figure out what the heck is going on for me. A lot of times I don't know. We don't always resolve things in the moment. I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions of people that people have of those in relationships. We don't always know what's going on. We don't always solve conflict or resolve it. What is that research, that amazing golden research by Gottman, that 69% of couples conflict is unresolvable?
Mm.
And really leaning into those places so we don't constantly put that pressure to feel like we have to package everything up with a bow, because both of us like to do that. Me more. I'll take responsibility for that.
Yeah, well, I'm often telling couples when I'm working with them that it's not the differences between you that are causing problems. It's constantly trying to resolve those differences that's causing problems. And it's easy for me to say that to another couple. It's a whole other thing for me to practice it with you, because I don't like those differences either. They're scary. They make me feel afraid, because if there's a difference between us, so the nervous system, so the lizard brain thinks, well, if there's a difference that's unresolvable, it means we can't be together,
Yeah.
and that's scary.
And I think for me, what's happened over the years, this wasn't there in the beginning, I equally was scared of those differences. What I found is that we have very complementary ways of being,
Hmm.
where I feel like areas that I don't feel like are my strength are your
Yeah.
strength. And areas where I feel like I have strength, and like really using those things, and recognizing that we both have them, so that we don't end up putting the other person on this pedestal as well. Because I know that I've done that before and have minimized what I bring to the
Totally.
you know.
Yeah, or try to make if I try to make you be more like me, number one, it doesn't work. Number two, I wouldn't like it if you did anyway. I don't want to be with me. Why do
Yeah,
I would annoy the hell out of me.
I hear you on that.
So learning, I think that's been a massive part of my journey in these last 5 years, has been, because my God, Sylvie, there's so many amazing gifts that you have, your gifts of just magic making. And like, even right now, this podcast, I wouldn't have done this way. It kind of, I would have wanted to plan it out. Let's schedule it a couple days. And like, I've been waiting years for this. And you're like, we just started talking about, within literally 30 minutes of it coming up in a conversation, here we are within 30 minutes. And I mean, there's so much that, I mean, what you've done through social media in these last 4 years, like, just in terms of your ability to connect with people, to create, I mean, beautiful blogs you're writing, and you're just what you've created online, and the energy, the community that's created around you, like all the things that I'm dying for, to be of service, to have impact, to create community, all of that. Like, you have such a capacity for that, and yet it's so easy for me to want to get in the way of it or change it, because it's not familiar to my way of doing things. But yet if I do that, it's like, it's like choking the golden goose to try to get more gold eggs out. I'm just killing the golden goose, and it doesn't work. But yet, so learning to tolerate, not just tolerate, but embrace the differences between us, uh, is both my most important work, but also sometimes the most frightening.
Well, I've said the same thing about you, meeting you in your courage and your ability to speak truth to some really uncomfortable,
Mm.
almost, what's the word that Esther Perel recently used?
Provocative, controversy,
It's
taboo.
provocative, taboo. It's almost like these things that we've made to be so taboo, but are so essential to explore and talk about. And I think that part of me that has always yearned um, to be able to speak to those places, and how much more courageous I feel like I have become being in partnership with you. And I fought that to the most. I mean, it's, again, like I said, it's taken 5 years to get to this podcast episode, but and it's, that's how the evolution of relationships, I think, need to be, and not to pressure ourselves to be further than what we are,
Mhm.
and to also allow that embracing to happen over time, and to kind of, there is a little bit of a faith and trust piece, um, of recognizing there were things about the person that I chose for a reason, unless of course there's harm or abuse, or those kinds of things. If those things are not there, it's always really good. I invite couples to look at those parts. It's okay for you to start to get frustrated and scared of the very parts you admire of your partner, but what's in that? Explore that, lean into that. See if those are parts of yourself that you might be wanting to take on, but you're afraid or don't know how. And then how can you ask your partner for support?
Mhm.
Because I think, that is a big piece of it. It can take so much humility to be able to acknowledge that part, and the fear piece. It can be very scary. Like, how many times have you told me you've never cried so much in your life since being with me?
Yeah. And we mean that in a good way.
Well,
Not because she beats me with a rolling pin every morning.
no beating
No.
on this podcast or ever.
No. No, because through your presence, through allowing myself, which has been scary, to depend on you in a way, to rely on you, to be vulnerable with you, to be seen by you. Again, talk about intimacy, seeing what is there to be seen. Like, you've seen me. There have been things that have happened, or old things that have been unresolved, uh, where there's been so much sadness that I wouldn't let myself feel for most of my life. And in your presence, as these things have been triggered, not by you, but by maybe a movie or by a conversation with somebody, or then all of a sudden there's this massive sadness present. Whereas before I would just turn away from it. Um, you're a pretty solid, strong stand for not turning away from it, and it's allowed me at times to sit with it and feel it, and know that I'm also being held by you in it, in those moments. And again, it's to me, it's a profound practice of intimacy with myself, exploring those areas of particularly sadness, also anger for me especially, at depths that I almost can't do by myself.
Well, I think you bring a really beautiful kind of third part of intimacy, right? We've talked about intimacy with self. We've talked about the relational sharing intimacy that
Mm-hmm.
happens in relationships. And then there's one that you just spoke to, that's like the kind of intimacy that we discover about ourselves in the presence of another, that can help witness and see us as we're that. I mean, talk
Yeah.
about vulnerability right there.
Yeah, and I think because, and it's been, especially what I want to say about that is, like, you're amazing at helping people and me. It's almost uncomfortable for me to say me, helping me feel safe, because I have to acknowledge that I generally don't feel safe. Even that is whew, I want to say, I'm always safe. I'm good. I got me. But to just say, especially when there's sadness present, I'm terrified. And I think that's what makes you a great both coach and an associate therapist. I can say that, right?
Mhm.
um, your ability, and a writer, to help people feel really safe, so that we can deepen in intimacy. I can deepen in intimacy with myself, which then, because I'm doing it in connect partnership with you, I think is a beautiful intimacy practice, relational intimacy practice. That
Sorry.
no, please go ahead.
And I think there's different bridges to get there. For you, me helping you with more of the emotional piece has been really
Yeah,
powerful.
for
But
sure.
for me, I've been swimming in my emotions my whole life. Having your intellectual ability to kind of ground me when I'm going through a hard time and, help me reality test things or just kind of walk me through it from that intellectual place has been so containing for my emotions. And I think, this is one of the things when people often even ask me when they, want to find someone to work with. It's like we all have different access points and different areas
Mm-hmm.
of focus. Some of us may want to, strengthen our left brain. Some of us might want to strengthen the right emotional, intuitive parts. And I think this is again where the we have had very different strengths and how they've been very compatible, but we've had to really recognize that and not try to make the other person like us. And we've evolved to integrate a lot of those pieces, but it's taken a long time.
And to do them with a little more skill than, because what you just said, I can hear a lot of guys out there going, but I try to do that for my lady all the time. I'm always trying to give her perspective or help her see the bright side of things or or just see it my way. And she hates it. So I want to
Really,
clarify something here, that it only serves, and I want to use that word specifically, serves our relationship when I offer intellectual grounding, perspective, thoughts, all of that, when two things are present. Number one, I have Sylvie's permission. And number two, I'm not doing it in a way that bypasses or dismisses what she's feeling.
beautiful distinctions. Yeah.
So important, because when I
And
don't,
permission isn't always like asking me, but reading my body language, or
reading your body language,
sometimes it's asking. Sometimes it's like, hey,
sometimes,
can I
yeah,
offer you some support, or do you just want me to listen? You know?
right, right. Or could also be noticing that when I start to offer some perspective, because that's my first thing that I want to do, and noticing she resists, this, oh, okay, backing off, okay, backing off, not trying to, you're not going to shove that down your throat, because that ain't going to work. For
Being
sure.
flexible and fluid around, that moment to moment intimacy and attunement absolutely helps a lot.
And so I think this is the art, the dance of intimacy. It is intimacy, knowing self, not even in some big metaphysical way, like knowing my spiritual God self or anything. No, I'm talking about, knowing my feelings. What am I feeling from moment to moment? What's happening in this body? What am I thinking? What are all the stories and the ideas and all the stuff that I'm carrying that, is mostly just a soup of the same shit I ate yesterday, had in my brain yesterday. And I think that is a foundation, at least in my journey, Sylvie, is that's been more of the foundation. I think you've come at this the opposite, from more relational. Like for me, the knowing self has been the foundation upon which I have now practiced attuning to other, really seeing seeing what is there to be seen, feeling what is there to be felt, which, like what I just said, when there's resistance, when I'm wanting to offer you something, perspective, logic, whatever, and feeling, okay, is she opening to this? Is this opening her or closing her? Her nervous system, is her body, is she liking this? Is she enjoying this? Or is this pissing her off? And she gives this, like, is it serving or is it? And if it's not serving, then back the fuck off. Whereas in the past, I would never back the fuck off. I would say, what the hell? Why aren't you taking this from me? It's, which is violating, but I never saw it that way, because it's an idea, it's perspective. This should free you.
Yeah, and I would say, like, for me, it's come from the other angle, being really coming from the relational, focusing externally,
Mm-hmm.
focusing outward, wanting to take care of the other person, and taking a step back and just being like, wow, it's okay and it's safe for me to just feel what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And wow, I mean, there are no words to describe the completely different relational experience that opened up for me from that place. And
I,
it's really hard to
I,
do.
I remember early in our relationship, you did something really courageous. We had only been dating, I think, 3 months.
Mm.
Holidays were coming. I was traveling so much I didn't even have a home. And I remember just by circumstance, or I don't remember, I don't remember how it came to be, but all of a sudden I was sort of looking at you like, yeah, I can stay at your place for like the holidays, right? You remember that?
Remember?
What happened?
Well, it wasn't quite time.
Right.
But boy, was it hard to speak those words. But
Because
that's where the boundaries was so
you
important for me.
you knew I had nowhere else. I mean, I didn't. I mean, you knew that I didn't have another place lined up.
I knew that you would be okay. You had the means to figure it out,
It's,
but I did know that you didn't have somewhere, yeah, at the moment, and it was terrifying for me to feel like I was, again, abandoning you, or keep making you feel, experience being stranded. It was not fun.
yeah, and I remember that was a great gift that you gave me because it was it was. I remember when I left your home and I was in my truck and I was driving around. I didn't even have a place yet, but I finally found a place. It was around the holidays. There weren't a lot of places to go, and I wasn't making a lot of money at that time. Spending it all every month on my business, on traveling, on everything. So
Mm.
you know. Anyway, I remember I did find a place in Malibu, a bedroom in someone's home, and it was so sweet. And so I took myself to see a Star Wars movie where Harrison Ford confronts his son, or the son. There's this father son thing that goes on, and I think because you really were true to what was true for you, Sylvie. You were really honoring of your awareness of self, what you needed. Okay, I need to not yet share my space with this person. It's too much, too fast.
Mm.
Rather than override that, you were true to yourself with that, and you were so kind and so understanding in the way that you were not at all cruel or unkind or harsh about it. You were very understanding. I don't even think I realized what courage it took for you to do that.
Mm.
But I remember the experience that I had was so profoundly connecting to myself. I have to face some father dad stuff that was coming up for me because it's the holidays. Where's my family?
Mm.
My dad wasn't checking in on me at that time. Not that he still doesn't. Like, I had to really face some stuff that I had been, again, ignoring. So anyway, it was and you came out and visited me a few days later, and it just was.
Well, and I think for me, that was a moment where I started to really play around with and discover how to be relational around boundaries. I think we're so often taught that boundaries need to be really, not always harsh, but there's like this firmness around them, and we have to just do it in that kind of way. And for me, as soon as I remember having, and I use the term boundary just because it can, I think, help us contextualize this. Um, I remember I was able to be loving with you about it afterwards,
Yeah.
and it was like, oh wow, like I can do this and take care of what I need, but also be very caring and sensitive about the aftermath of that boundary. And I think that's a really important piece. We can't always do that. Sometimes if I'm angry, I need to just walk out the door and take care of myself. I'm not going to poke my head back in. Oh, honey, I'll be right back in. Well, you should say you're coming right back if if
Yeah.
you have a partner that has fear of
Do
abandonment,
it
but
through gritted teeth. I'll
do
be right
it.
back.
I'll be right back in 20 minutes. But I think that was really freeing for me, that I could, and as our relationship developed, it became so much easier for me to have boundaries and not do that, because like there was enough safety and trust that I could say, no, honey, I can't do that right now. And you wouldn't guilt me or make me feel bad, or I didn't feel like I was a bad person, which was, one of the biggest narratives that I was carrying around, like, because I never wanted anyone to feel bad.
Well, I think that was a gift of my doing self-intimacy for a long time. I was able to contain, hold, see so much of what was coming up for me, and know, I kind of have this at least very intellectual awareness that it's not her fault.
Yeah.
She's free to be her. She's free, her needs and wants, even if I don't understand them or like them, or if they're not convenient for me, it's okay. She's allowed to have those, and they are going to trigger me and things are going to happen, but that's mine.
Yeah.
And I think, in those moments, it serves me well. I think that's something that, there was another, even in that early time where, again, I wanted to take you to see my family. I wanted to take you on this, right? Again, we'd only been dating 3 months, and I wanted to take you on a 2-week extravaganza to see all my family across the United States. I was so excited.
Oh.
And you were like, what was your response to that?
I think I just looked at you with my face felt a little bit like frozen. I was a little bit just,
It was
I wasn't ready.
yeah. What I heard in very loving terms was, hell no. And that was pretty devastating to me. I was devastated. Like I was
That was a hard
really,
one.
like I had to, but again, it's my ethic is to, I don't ever want to make you feel responsible for what I'm experiencing. And now, taken to an extreme, it doesn't serve our relational intimacy, because we do have impact on each other. How you show up does have impact on me, and vice versa. And I think that's the dance here is I think a lot of us, I work with, especially men, when I work with men and I get into this conversation, and this has been my, through many years, my challenge in understanding this. It is a bit of a paradox. I am fully responsible for what's happening, my feelings, my choices, my behaviors, my thought, all of that. Like I can take ownership of that. And though, how you show up does have impact on me, and vice versa. I think most of us, and myself included, and this is when it wouldn't work, I could be very harsh with you, crossing my arms and that's your shit. I don't know if I ever said that word like that, but that was basically my energy.
Yeah.
In the beginning. That's your stuff. I'm not taking any responsibility for it. And it does, the relational intimacy collapses.
Yeah.
In that moment. And I know, I there were some times where I can just remember, and I'm so glad that we were able to find our way through that. Because, now looking back, and even, if there's moments even in our current times where I may sort of have a flash of that old stubborn fool, I know how hurtful that is. And I'm sorry, babe. So I'm still working on it,
I'm very lucky to be with someone that cares so much to be aware of those things and wants to acknowledge them and repair those moments. And I haven't seen that in a long time.
Yeah.
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 And, I think it's important to share with people that like both you and I have gotten therapy, like we do our own, when things come up in our relationship, we go to therapy. And I think it's really important to recognize how normal that is. And now I want to normalize that more so that couples don't feel like they have to carry this alone, and that they, we don't have the same villages and communal ways of living for most of us. And so therapists have become our wise elders in many ways, counselors and coaches. And they're oftentimes a lot of the people we go to who can hold space for normalizing these kinds of experiences and helping with tools to come out of them in ways that are holding much more of a partnership way of
Yeah.
being.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap this up, babe, with some key takeaways. What do you think?
Yes.
Let's three key takeaways from this conversation.
Well, it's a good thing I was taking some notes.
One thing you do so well, I've seen it.
I think the key takeaway is acknowledging that intimacy, there's intimacy of self and there's relational intimacy, and they're both, interwinding with one another, and they inform one another, and they both have so much value, and what's that word? They're pouring into the same.
Cup, river,
Sure. Let's
toilet,
do that. No, not
bath.
toilet. Into the same river. That's the most poetic
Okay.
option I got.
Okay. Ocean.
That's one. And I would say the second piece is really spending time acknowledging the systems, the different systems that might be playing out in your relationship. It's really easy to think things are happening on a personal level. It's Bryan, it's Silvy. Sometimes it's systemic racism, sometimes it's capitalism, sometimes it's patriarchy, sometimes it's individualism versus communal living, and all of these things, we're in the water. We don't realize that they're impacting our relationship and us, and how important it can be to unpack those and look at them in a more externalized way.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I'll offer the third takeaway, and that is that intimacy is a lifetime journey, both with self and with your partner. I mean, you and I are, I mean, I'm 46 and I'm still learning new things about myself as I go into therapy, as I just continue reading new books. And shoot, every time I have a new client in my coaching practice, I learn something new about myself through their presence. And of course, with you and I, 5 years, 5.5 years together, and I feel like there's just so much more. Even as you grow, I've seen you grow and evolve so much just in our 5 years together. And imagine in another 5 years, I mean, it's like there's always not always, but there's, yeah, maybe always, really, if I'm doing intimacy well, you, Silvy, are a new human being for me to figure out, learn how to interact with, to engage, to be intimate with, to feel what's happening for you, and moment by moment. And something that I did yesterday that may have served you yesterday, I tried again today, and oops, it's not the thing.
Well, and it's also, as you say, the third takeaway is being open to your partner's change, and I think
Yeah,
that can be one of
that's
the
right. Yeah.
one of the most important things is trying not to hold them to be who they were yesterday or last year or 5 years ago.
Well, that's so true. And I mean, when you and I met, I was this fiercely independent. I didn't have a home. I was traveling all over the place. I was just like so on my mission. And now look at 5 years later, I'm dying for like the family. That pillar family wasn't even in my consciousness 5 years ago. I wasn't even thinking about it. And now you've done this to me.
I did.
Now 5 years later, I mean, we're exploring, we're welcoming in the how do I say this, the opportunity, the possibility, the likelihood, the vision of having a child. And I'm missing my own family so much. Like, I have evolved so much over these 5 years, and that presents its own challenges as well. So, but babe, I am so thankful. Thank you so much for being here with me in my life, but I mean also on this podcast. Has this been fun for you?
Absolutely. I mean, it's when I do these things with you, I get to see you in a different light.
Mm,
So
mm.
it's seeing you in your element, and it's fun. I know this is doing work together has been a big part of our vision, and we've had to do a lot of work ourselves to kind of build towards doing more of this kind of stuff. So It's very exciting, and I'm thrilled to do more. And I hope this served your community, and can't wait to hear the feedback.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thank you, babe, so much. So good to have you here. I love you and look forward to having you back again in the future. Just last thing, what do you want people to know about what you're up to, where they can find you?
I would say the best way to find me is on my Instagram page, which is at Silvy Khoucasian, SilvyKhoucasian. It's a long one.
I'll put it in the show notes at brianreeves.com/men this way podcast because I don't expect anyone to remember. But if you do, anyway, babe, keep going, please. Spell it. Can you spell that 17 more times so that everyone knows?
No. Well, it's where I share a lot of my relationship content and attachment
Instagram.
styles on my Instagram page.
Instagram.
Yes, I talk about Instagram on my Instagram. I talk about I talk about attachment styles and attachment theory, boundaries, and all kinds of relational topics, because that's just such a huge part of my purpose. And you can find me there if you want some support around that.
Great. Wonderful, babe. Thank you so much. So good to have you here. Love you.
Love you.
Hey guys, if you're a man committed to thriving in every domain of your life, then consider joining me personally for Elevate 2021, a year-long coaching adventure for men alongside men. Learn more at bryanreeves.com/elevate. It's Bryan with a Y, reeves.com/elevate.